The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, our first guest today has written a feminist history of Europe's largest red light district and an examination of the lives of the women who worked there. She's here to tell us about it. Welcome to the show, Caroline West.
Thank you for having me, Selina. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? That's a lovely Irish accent.
It is. It's a very tired one. It's been a whirlwind, but incredible.
Bless you. What are you doing? Sort of showing your book off?
Yes, yeah, and also talking about vulvas on stage for another event. So that was fabulous too. So it's been an unusual couple of weeks, I think.
Bless you, bless you. Well, it's an unusual subject, this. What made you want to write it?
Yeah, so it's fascinating, all the things you can learn through sex. So, we're so weird about sex all the time, and it's like, why, sex can be lovely and silly and fun and gorgeous or violent and horrible. And it's like, why are we so weird about this thing? So looking at sex, you can look at the experiences of women, things like the porn industry, history, misogyny, everything else. And like through discovering the lives of women through sex, I was able to find out that they played a role in the fight for Irish independence. So when we look at sex, there's so much there because it touches all of us, no pun intended. But it's a really fascinating area. And the reason that I kind of zoned in on Monto was just pure coincidence that I one day I read this sentence that the women who had worked there as sex workers, when they went into the hospital to get treatment for syphilis, that they were smothered with pillows to put them out of their misery. And I was like, excuse me, what? That deserves a lot more than one sentence, and that's shocking. And this was 2015. We knew at the time a lot more about what the Magdalen laundries were like in Ireland and the mother and baby homes and, the sheer violence that was perpetrated on women who were seen as the wrong kind of women. And that was again through sex. These were the wrong kind of women because they had sex outside of marriage or got pregnant or worked as sex workers, So it was really interesting to see what the state and church have combined to do to these kind of women. So that's hence the name Wrong Women. And someone came up to me at the launch and said, should it be wronged women? And I was like, yes, it can be both because they were definitely wronged as well. I
understand. They were wrong and they were wronged. Yeah, indeed. When you mention 2015, is that when we found out about it? Because we're talking, 1800s, 1700s?
Yeah, so it's Monto kind of really had its heyday 1860s up to 1880s. And then from then it kind of started really descending into pure poverty and chaos. But it kept going until 1925. We're actually coming up to the 100-year anniversary of it being closed on the 12th of March, which is interesting because most red light districts will either fizzle out or keep going. And on the 12th of March, we had a Catholic campaigner called Frank Duff who marched in and put crucifixes up and said, that's it, the area is cleansed. He turfed out all the undesirables and moved other people in. But of course, that wasn't the end of Monto. So it kind of got forgotten about a lot though, because at the time, the Irish Church and State were saying, we're this new Irish Republic. We're not like the English. We've shaken off those shackles of colonialism, and a good Irish woman is a married woman who stays at home, has loads and loads of kids, did her part for that Irish chaste femininity image that we were trying to promote at the time. So the women of Monto weren't part of that. So a lot of their history was kind of suppressed, but it's lived on in stories and family histories, and thankfully the work of local historians who've kind of preserved it. But there's so much there. When I first got the book contract, it was 80,000 words. And I was like, I'm never going to fill all that up. They're going to, take their money back or whatever. But actually, I could probably write 5 books on just this 1 square mile and everything that went on there. It's fascinating.
Is Monto the 1 square mile then? Is that an area of Dublin?
Yes. So if you've ever been to Dublin, sorry, and you go down O'Connell Street, which is kind of the main street. That's the one with the spire. And then if you were to go down Talbot Street towards a train station called Connolly Station, it's just up from there. And it was actually the perfect little location. So a lot of red light districts need discretion. They need time. Monto is the right place, the right time. So all the houses became really, really cheap. So it was easy for madams to buy lots of them and set up empires of brothels. But it was also next to the docks and the army barracks for British soldiers, train stations. You know, they had every possible aspect, you know, of life passing through, from royalty to sailors to priests to James Joyce. You know, it was a real staple of Irish history and, you know, played that role in the Irish Rising because the women would get information from the British soldiers going, hey, honey, you know, where are you going next week? I'd love to see you again. And then actually pass on that information to the Irish revolutionaries who were going to use that to plan the Easter Rising. So, you know, they did play that really important role because it's women and sex and working class histories. We've kind of forgotten about it a bit.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought it to light. And were the women workers both young and old?
Yeah, there was a whole range. Like some people went into Monto, you know, they made their money, they went off again and never ever, you know, stepped foot in it again. And other people stayed there for life, basically. There were older women. There's one called Shilling Ago, and she was I think she was in her 60s or 70s. And unfortunately, the nickname does what it says. It cost a shilling to have sex with her, and she was quite an elderly lady. And she was one of the last kind of women working there. So it was a real mix, because a lot of the women, you have to look at their humanity, you know, where were they coming from? And a lot of the time, you know, the early people in Monto were coming from the famine. They were coming from family violence, poor economic opportunities. You know, what else do? You know, you have to survive. There wasn't a welfare state at the time. So the women that kind of ended up there and stayed there for a long time, they either became madams or they moved in, they lived there. You know, there were lots of family homes in Monto as well. It was a real mishmash of every aspect of humanity. But, you know, a lot of those women, they didn't have anywhere else to go. And a lot of society were like, oh, you're just a poor unfortunate, or you're one of those women. So a lot of the opportunities would be closed off to them. And even the refuges that were set up, they prefer to take in younger women who were like freshly fallen, they would say, so that if they had just maybe one incident of bad behaviour, whereas the people on the streets for longer, they're the ones that actually really needed it, because the longer you're on the streets, the more traumatised you risk becoming. And, you know, that the more life gets harder. And it's like those women were turned away from these places. So you can see that the level of cruelty was just kind of there on every aspect of their lives. It was a really hard life for them.
Yeah, I'm sure. And when you say about being traumatized, I'm assuming some of the sex was violent.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's lots of consensual sex. People came in, happy days, you know, everything was great. But unfortunately, it's not always going to be that case. So some of the madams would order their bully boys, which we kind of probably now call pimps, to rape their women if they angered them. Or, you know, the soldiers and sailors, they'd be on a boat the next morning. You know, they're basically untouchable. And there was also situations where the landlords, you know, if the rent wasn't paid, they'd say, no, don't worry. How's your daughter doing today? Send her down to see me. And, you know, so then you have women in the impossible choice of homelessness or having your daughter raped by your landlord. You know, like this is the reality of that life, you know. And like the top class brothels were lovely and glamorous, and, you know, the women had silks and furs and lace and gorgeous decor and fires and food and drink, and everything was like very, very glamorous. Prince Albert paid visits as well. But then on the other side of it, you had women who were on the streets. And, you know, when you're on the streets, you're extremely vulnerable to sexual violence because you're on your own. You know, when you're in the brothel, at least there's other people. Maybe you can cry out. Maybe you have help. You know, the bouncers are there. But when you're in the streets, or what really a lot of the brothels became by the end of Monto was like a bare room, like that maybe had floorboards. They were probably ripped up for firewood, you know, just filthy, awful, dehumanizing conditions. And it's like, if you're on your own in that place, no one's coming to look for you. No one's coming to help you. So it's extremely vulnerable to be in those positions, but a lot of them would also have experienced sexual violence too, from childhood, in state institutions, from the family. You know, in like incest in families was huge, domestic and sexual violence was huge. So, you know, these women, even if they tried to get a regular job, you know, as a domestic servant, they're at risk of the man of the house raping them and then kicking them out if they became pregnant. So really was a time in Ireland when there just was very little opportunities for women unless you were more middle class and upwards women, working class women. Just, it was a fight to survive in a lot of times.
And I guess that all came down to luck, did it? Who you were, what family you were born into, you know, which side of the bed you were born, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the class system was really kicking in Ireland at that point. And, you know, we were just trying to survive after the famine. You know, the middle classes were more emerging. Like the famine in Ireland, you know, in the country, in the rural areas, you had people dying on the way to the workhouse and animals eating their bodies. Whereas in Dublin, you had people going to the horse races and getting off their face on bottles of imported whiskey and having a great time. So again, class is something we really need to look at when we're telling other people's stories.
Yeah, indeed. And these wronged and wrong women, do you bring them to life? Have you got names of them in the book and a little bit about them?
Yeah, I was really excited about that because I got to talk to the great granddaughters of some of the madams. Wow. So, and they have their belongings, you know, and they look at the spirit of the women and took their strength and you know, really kind of play it out through their lives. One descendant is now a therapist who works with sex workers. One is a poet. So they're descendants of a woman called Annie Meehan. So she had 200 brothels. So she was quite a queen. Yeah, she did quite well. But also, you know, like, ran everything with an iron fist because you had to, but also helped out girls who would turn up pregnant at the train station and give them a job nannying and then give them like a fake death certificate for a fake husband so that they could emigrate when they saved up some money and they could be a good woman and say, look, I'm just a widow, you know, and could start a new life somewhere else with their baby. But at the same time, you know, Annie is a complicated person. She was pregnant at 13, married at 14, and ran like her brothels, you know, really quite violently. Like a lot of the madams would slash the girls' faces with bacon knives, you know, and that was really a life-changing thing to do because once you're visibly marked as that wrong woman, your life opportunities completely changed. We had another woman called May Oblong, and she was one of the absolute queens of Monto. She really dominated it. Was there for decades. She was a costumier. My brain's not working anymore. She gave clothes to the women. But she would say, you know, that 12 was a good age to start sex work, which was... No. You know, pretty
hard
horrific.
To imagine, yeah. Hard to imagine.
Yeah.
And is this your first book, Caroline?
It is, yeah. But I do write about sex and relationships, you know, for newspapers and pop culture and things like that. So I'm not new to writing, but this is my first book itself.
Oh, and do you have a website then so people can find out more about you?
Oh, I do. Yeah. It's, I am carolinewest.com, or my Instagram is Dr. Caroline West, where it's usually sex and sausage dogs. That seems to be my two loves in life. Who knew?
Who knew? Exactly. Well, this book for our listeners is called Wrong Women, Selling Sex in Monto, Dublin's forgotten red light district. It's been described as fascinating and an integral part of the history of Dublin that has been lost to time for too long. And it's by Caroline West, who we're speaking to now. If you do another one, if you decide you've got much more to tell, then do let us know, Caroline.
I do. I'm trying to force myself to not start writing another book, but I have 2 more books in my head floating around. I need to have weekends of not doing anything for a little while, and then I will.
You need a rest, then get started again. Recharge your batteries.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you take care. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Selina.
Bye-bye.